The night opens with a hush. Somewhere, beneath the vast sky of history, a palace waits in silence. The corridors are empty now. Only the soft whisper of wind brushing across the marble floors remains. A candle flickers against a wall of portraits, their painted eyes glinting faintly in the light, as though they still remember the lives that passed before them. The air feels heavy with memory, and the stillness is not peace. It is the calm that lingers after centuries of secrets have been spoken and then buried again. Palaces were never only homes. They were theaters, prisons, and battlegrounds made of stone and silk. In the quiet of night, the grandeur fades and the truth begins to surface. The golden ceilings, once echoing with laughter and music, hold stories that cannot rest. Murders committed not out of passion, but out of necessity. Alliances born in deceit. Smiles that hid the trembling fear of tomorrow. Each palace, no matter the country or century, was a living organism, its heart beating to the rhythm of power, its breath scented with ambition and betrayal. Tonight, we walk softly through these whispering halls. There is no rush here. Every footstep echoes like a memory. Every shadow feels alive. The moonlight spills through tall, arched windows, touching tapestries that depict victories long forgotten. Somewhere, a clock ticks in slow defiance of time itself. The world outside sleeps, but inside these walls, the ghosts of kings and queens still move unseen. They glide down corridors of history, leaving behind traces of perfume, candle wax, and the faint metallic scent of regret. The walls of these palaces have heard everything. The cries of newborn heirs, the prayers of the condemned, the laughter of lovers who knew their moments were borrowed. Yet they tell nothing. They simply hold the silence, carrying it from one generation to the next. To listen closely is to hear the weight of centuries pressing against the present moment. To stand in such a place is to understand that beauty and danger have always shared the same throne. This journey is not about fear, but fascination, the kind that arrives quietly, curling around the imagination like smoke. We will wander through gilded rooms and secret chambers, tracing the faint outline of history's darker pulse. There will be no loud discoveries, no sharp edges of alarm, only soft revelations that unfold like an evening prayer. Because these are not stories of horror, but of humanity, its hunger, its sorrow, its endless need to control the world and each other. Power was always a fragile crown. Those who wore it lived not in comfort, but in constant negotiation with destiny. To rule was to gamble everything: love, family, safety, even the soul itself. Behind every jeweled crown lies a trail of invisible hands that pushed, poisoned, or plotted in silence. The palaces of the past were not only built from marble and gold. They were constructed from lies carefully placed like stones, each one necessary to hold up the illusion of perfection. As the night deepens, our path will move from one palace to another, across continents and centuries. We will visit Florence, where the Medici dined with both artists and assassins. We will drift through the mirrored corridors of Versailles, where gossip could kill faster than any blade. We will pass through the silken rooms of the Ottoman harem, where whispers could decide the fate of empires. Each place will unfold like a dream, slow and deliberate, until we lose the sense of time itself. The stories we uncover will not be told with judgment. They will be told as they are, fragments of human nature caught in the dance between ambition and fear. Each betrayal, each secret death, will be placed gently before you, like an old letter discovered in a forgotten drawer. The ink may have faded, but the emotion remains. Because the truth of history is not in its dates, but in its echoes. And when we reach the final palace, when the last candle burns low, perhaps we will see that betrayal is not only the act of one person against another, but the quiet turning of fate against all who believe they could control it. The marble halls, the jeweled crowns, the silken robes, all of it was temporary. What remains is the whisper, the faint sound of memory moving through time. So, settle into the stillness. Let the sound of ancient footsteps and distant voices drift through your thoughts. Let curiosity replace fear and peace replace noise. Tonight, the palaces of the past open their doors not to rulers or rebels, but to dreamers, to those who wish to listen. And in the gentle rhythm of their stories, may you find a kind of rest, the way one finds sleep, slowly, deeply, and within the quiet truth that history never truly dies. It only softens into silence. Power, when viewed from a distance, glows like gold. It dazzles, seduces, and promises safety in its radiance. Yet up close, beneath the polished surface of thrones and jeweled crowns, it is fragile, trembling under the weight of fear and ambition. The palaces that once shimmered with music and laughter were, in truth, arenas of quiet struggle. Every royal corridor, every mirrored hall, was a battlefield where victory came not through open war, but through whispers, alliances, and betrayal. The illusion of control was everything, and to lose it was to invite death disguised as diplomacy. Imagine a throne room at dawn, sunlight piercing through high windows, striking the gold leaf that decorates the ceiling. Courtiers stand in rigid lines, faces arranged into masks of devotion. Yet behind every bow and every smile lies calculation. The monarch sits alone at the center, clothed in velvet and command, but surrounded by invisible daggers. Trust is a luxury no ruler can afford. Even among family, loyalty is a question whispered in the dark. A crown, after all, does not rest easily. It presses, it weighs, it wounds. Throughout history, the pursuit of power has rarely been noble. It has been desperate, lonely, and often bloody. In ancient dynasties, heirs were chosen and discarded as easily as chess pieces. A son might become a threat, a wife, a weapon, a friend, a liability. The splendor of royal courts served as a curtain, concealing the fear that lived behind it. Every decision, every alliance carried risk. A single wrong word at a banquet could mean exile, or worse, a silent end behind closed doors. Power demanded constant vigilance, and even the most radiant queens and emperors slept lightly, haunted by the thought that those who served them by day might destroy them by night. Consider the great empires of the past. The Egyptian pharaohs, the Byzantine emperors, the monarchs of Europe. Each believed their rule was divinely ordained, their authority untouchable. Yet history shows a repeating pattern. The higher the throne, the sharper the fall. For every ruler who basked in triumph, there were others who fell victim to their own kin. Brothers murdered brothers in the name of succession. Advisors turned conspirators. Lovers turned informants. In the end, it was rarely the foreign invader that toppled a kingdom, but the whisper of betrayal within its own walls. The cost of power was not only paid in blood, but in the slow erosion of peace. Imagine the nights inside these palaces, the long hours when the courtiers have gone, when the music fades, and a ruler sits awake in silence. The flicker of a candle throws shadows against the walls, each one shaped like the face of someone they can no longer trust. Letters sealed and burned. Locks checked twice. A cup of wine left untouched because its sweetness could conceal death. Beneath the glitter of power lived constant suspicion, and beneath suspicion, loneliness deeper than any dungeon. Still, power had its allure. It offered not only fear, but fascination, the illusion of immortality. To build a palace was to defy time, to carve one's name into the marble of history. And so, generation after generation, men and women pursued it despite knowing the price. Some did so with cruelty, others with grace, but all shared the same hunger, to leave behind a mark that would outlast their flesh. The tragedy was that in their quest for legacy, they often destroyed the very things that made them human. Compassion was weakness, trust was folly, love, a vulnerability that enemies could exploit. The court itself was a living organism, fed by rumor and intrigue. Servants carried messages in hushed tones, Nobles traded secrets like currency. A glance could signal allegiance. A gesture could end a career. The smallest details, a misplaced letter, a delayed greeting, a door left slightly ajar, could shift the balance of fate. Those who survived longest were not the strongest or bravest, but the ones who learned to read silence. To navigate court life was to dance constantly between flattery and deceit, never stepping too close to either. And yet, despite all the danger, the game continued. Power, for those who possessed it, was both poison and necessity. It offered meaning, structure, a reason to wake each day beneath the burden of a crown. The irony was cruel. To rule was to fear losing the very thing that defined you. Those who succeeded often did so not through might, but through patience, calculation, and an understanding of human frailty. They mastered the art of appearing calm while chaos stirred beneath their feet. In the glow of hindsight, the stories of kings and queens seem distant, almost mythic. But if one listens closely, their struggles are not so different from our own. The yearning for control, the fear of betrayal, the desire to be remembered. These are not royal afflictions. They are human ones. The palaces of the past merely amplified them, turning private emotion into public spectacle. And so, behind the grandeur, we find reflection, a mirror that shows us not only the rulers, but ourselves. As we move deeper into history, the pattern becomes clearer. Every dynasty, no matter how mighty, stood on the same fragile foundation. Trust built on fear, loyalty balanced on ambition. And when that balance tipped, the result was inevitable. A cup raised in toast one night could mark the beginning of a downfall. A smile at court could hide the face of a killer. Power was never stable, only temporarily held. It was a flame passed from hand to hand, burning everyone who dared to hold it for too long. And so, as we leave this chamber of thrones and daggers, the sound of echoes follows us down the hall. The glitter fades, and the truth remains. Power, though magnificent to behold, is always shadowed by danger. Behind every crown lies a story of survival. Behind every royal lineage, a trail of sacrifice. The walls remember, even when history forgets. They have absorbed centuries of ambition, deceit, and quiet grief. And as we step toward the next chapter, deeper into the marble labyrinth of history, we carry with us this knowledge, that the beauty of power and the horror of its cost are forever intertwined, two sides of the same eternal coin. The city of Florence, at the height of the Renaissance, was a dream painted in stone. The air shimmered with the scent of oil paint, marble dust, and blooming orange trees. Bells rang from distant cathedrals, and along the Arno River, the reflection of the Palazzo Vecchio stretched across the water like a golden ghost. Art was not merely admired here, it was worshipped. But behind the beauty, behind the frescoes and sonnets and symphonies, the Medici family ruled with a grace that was equal parts brilliance and fear. Their power, like the city itself, was radiant by day and treacherous by night. To walk through a Medici palace was to step into a world of contradictions. Every wall gleamed with wealth, yet every corner held a secret. The Medici were patrons of Michelangelo, Botticelli, and Da Vinci, but they were also masters of manipulation, playing politics as skillfully as any artist wields a brush. Their lineage stretched across popes, queens, and dukes, a dynasty that blended intellect with ruthlessness. In the candlelight of their halls, art and ambition existed side by side, each feeding the other, each disguising the quiet cruelty required to survive. At the center of this golden web stood Francesco I de' Medici. He was a man of science, deeply curious and fascinated by the natural world. His study overflowed with alchemical instruments, rare minerals, and glass vessels that caught the sunlight in strange colors. Yet even the pursuit of knowledge could not shield him from the dangerous dance of power. His marriage to Bianca Capello, a Venetian noblewoman of remarkable beauty and mystery, caused endless scandal. Their love was passionate, defiant, and utterly doomed. Theirs was a union that challenged politics, religion, and fate itself. And in the end, it would destroy them both. Francesco had not intended to fall in love with Bianca. She had fled Venice after an illicit affair, finding refuge in Florence. When they met, she was already married, yet the attraction between them was undeniable. In a world where marriages were arranged for advantage, their bond was rare, a matter of emotion rather than strategy. But the Medici court did not forgive love that defied convenience. Whispers followed them through the corridors, venom wrapped in courtesy. The Florentine elite called her a sorceress, a temptress who had ensnared the Grand Duke with charms not of this world. To love her was to invite suspicion, and suspicion, in palatial circles, was a quiet death sentence. Years passed, and power shifted. Francesco's first wife died under circumstances that some found suspicious, and Bianca soon became Grand Duchess. They lived in opulent isolation at the Villa di Poggio a Caiano, surrounded by gardens of impossible beauty. Yet the atmosphere within was heavy, perfumed with secrecy, thick with tension. They dined beneath frescoed ceilings depicting gods and muses, but their table was set with mistrust. Servants moved silently, glancing at one another when their masters weren't looking. Something in the air had changed, something unseen but certain. It was as if the palace itself was holding its breath. In October of 1587, the quiet was broken. Francesco and Bianca both fell ill within days of each other. Fever gripped them, their bodies weakened, their minds clouded. Courtiers murmured about malaria, but others whispered a darker explanation. The Medici were no strangers to poison. It had long been their silent weapon of choice. The symptoms fit too neatly, the timing too perfect. By the time the sun rose again, Francesco lay dead, and Bianca followed him within hours. Two lives extinguished in a single night, their love story sealed by a shroud of suspicion. For centuries, the question lingered. Was it disease, or was it murder? The official records spoke of natural causes, but few believed them. Their rival, Cardinal Ferdinando de' Medici, was conveniently next in line. He returned to Florence the moment the news broke, took control of the state, and ordered the burial of both victims with haste. He made sure the official story remained unchallenged, and for generations, that was the version the world accepted. Yet the people of Florence, those who had served, watched, and listened, knew better. They spoke quietly of a chalice, of bitter wine, of revenge disguised as providence. Centuries later, when modern scientists exhumed the bodies, they found traces of arsenic in the bones, proof, perhaps, of what history had always suspected. But by then, it no longer mattered who poured the poison. The Medici had long since become legend, and their sins, like their art, were woven into the identity of Florence itself. The story of Francesco and Bianca was no longer just a tale of love and death. It was a parable of power, showing how even the most radiant beauty could conceal decay beneath its surface. The contrast was striking. The same family that gave the world its greatest art also perfected the craft of silent murder. The same hands that commissioned cathedrals could mix poison in a golden cup. It was this duality that defined the Renaissance, not only an age of enlightenment, but of darkness refined to elegance. In Florence, the divine and the deadly shared a table, and the city thrived on both. Imagine standing in the Palazzo Pitti today, where sunlight filters through centuries-old windows and settles on the marble floors once walked by the Medicis. The air feels still, but the walls remember. They have seen ambition take shape in whispers and crumble in sighs. Somewhere, in the faint echo of your footsteps, you can almost hear Bianca's laughter, Francesco's voice, the clink of crystal glasses raised in what might have been a toast or a farewell. The palaces of Florence, for all their beauty, remain haunted not by ghosts, but by truths too fragile to name aloud. As night settles over the Arno, the city glows softly, as if illuminated from within by its memories. The river carries reflections of bridges and lanterns, shimmering like molten gold. Above it all, the legacy of the Medici lingers, not merely in museums and paintings, but in the invisible thread that connects beauty to power and power to ruin. In their story lies the essence of every palace, that no matter how radiant its halls, there are always secrets in the shadows, waiting to be remembered. And so, as the sound of the river fades into the quiet of the night, the tale of Francesco and Bianca becomes part of the larger melody of betrayal that echoes through history's palaces. We leave Florence with a single truth whispered through time, that in the pursuit of splendor, love and death often drink from the same cup. Versailles was never just a palace. It was a world built to dazzle, to command awe, and to conceal the delicate machinery of control beneath its golden skin. In the 18th century, as the sun set over France's absolute monarchy, the palace glowed like a living dream. Miles of polished marble reflected the light of thousands of candles. Perfume drifted through endless corridors. The laughter of courtiers echoed beneath frescoed ceilings depicting gods and angels, as if heaven itself had taken residence in the king's home. Yet for all its radiance, Versailles was a place of masks, and no mask could be worn forever. Behind the sparkle of diamonds and silks lay a tension so fragile that one false whisper could bring the entire illusion to its knees. It was here, amid the glitter and deceit, that one of the most infamous scandals in history unfolded, the affair of the diamond necklace. It was a story so strange, so improbable, that it seemed less like fact and more like an elaborate fable crafted to humiliate a queen. But it was real, and it would become the first tremor of an empire about to shatter. At its heart stood Marie Antoinette, a woman both adored and despised, born into privilege and imprisoned by perception. Around her spun a web of greed, deceit, and obsession that would ruin reputations, end lives, and stain the French crown forever. The story begins not with the queen herself, but with a necklace, a creation of impossible beauty. Designed by the most skilled jewelers of France, it was composed of hundreds of diamonds, shimmering like frozen stars. It was meant originally for Louis XV to give to his mistress, Madame du Barry, but before the gift could be presented, the king died, and the necklace remained unsold, a masterpiece without a master. The jewelers, desperate to recover their fortunes, tried to sell it to the new queen, Marie Antoinette, but she refused. France was drowning in debt. The people were starving. The queen, though fond of luxury, understood that such extravagance would only feed the rumors of her excess. Yet even her refusal would not save her. The necklace would find its way into her story regardless, not as an ornament, but as a weapon. Enter Jeanne de la Motte, a woman of sharp mind and sharper ambition. She was of noble blood, but impoverished, a descendant of the Valois line, reduced to surviving on charm and deception. She moved through Parisian society like a shadow, blending pity and seduction to get what she wanted. Jeanne saw opportunity where others saw obstacles, and when she heard of the unsold necklace, she devised a plan so intricate that it could only have been born of desperation. She would use the necklace not to adorn herself, but to manipulate the very heart of power. Jeanne's plan required a mark, as she found him in Cardinal de Rohan, a man of influence, vanity, and wounded pride. The cardinal longed to return to the queen's favor after years of her cold disdain. He saw in Jeanne a means to redemption, and Jeanne saw in him a willing accomplice. She convinced him that she was secretly in contact with the queen, that Marie Antoinette longed for reconciliation but could not speak openly. To maintain the illusion, Jeanne arranged forged letters, written in an imitation of the queen's hand, each one carefully scented, sealed, and delivered with the drama of authenticity. The cardinal, blinded by hope and flattery, believed every word. The deception grew until it became a performance of astonishing scale. One night, in the moonlit gardens of Versailles, Jeanne arranged for the cardinal to meet a woman disguised as the queen herself. She was a courtesan, chosen for her resemblance to Marie Antoinette, cloaked in silk and shadows. The meeting was brief, a whispered exchange, a rose handed from one gloved hand to another. But it was enough. The cardinal fell to his knees, believing forgiveness had been granted. The next act of the illusion would seal both his fate and the queen's. Through Jean's manipulation, the cardinal agreed to purchase the diamond necklace on the queen's behalf, believing it was a secret arrangement meant to spare royal embarrassment. The jewelers, thrilled to finally sell their treasure, handed over the masterpiece, expecting repayment from the crown. But the necklace never reached the palace. Jean and her accomplices dismantled it, selling the diamonds piece by piece across Europe. For a brief moment, she had everything she had ever wanted: wealth, influence, and the satisfaction of outsmarting the powerful. But like all lies born within palaces, the truth was destined to surface. When the jewelers demanded payment from a queen, confusion turned to outrage. Marie Antoinette denied ever ordering the necklace. The cardinal, certain he had acted in loyalty, produced the forged letters as proof. The court erupted into chaos. Whispers filled Versailles like a storm. The affair went to trial, and the scandal became public, a spectacle that captivated all of France. In the streets of Paris, pamphlets depicted the queen as a manipulative seductress, a foreigner who bled the kingdom dry while her subjects starved. The truth, that she had been innocent, the victim of an elaborate hoax, did not matter. Perception had already written its verdict. The cardinal was disgraced, Jean was arrested, and the queen's reputation was shattered beyond repair. Though Jean was eventually branded, flogged, and imprisoned, she escaped to London, where she published her memoirs, weaving new lies to keep the legend alive. Marie Antoinette, meanwhile, never recovered from the wound to her image. To the people, she became the embodiment of royal excess, the villain in a story of greed and corruption. The necklace affair, though small in comparison to the tragedies that followed, planted the seed of rebellion in the minds of the public. When the revolution came, it was not just the monarchy that fell, it was the illusion of innocence itself. To walk through Versailles today is to move through a memory that still glitters but no longer deceives. The mirrors in the Hall of Mirrors reflect more than light. They reflect the fragility of reputation, the cost of perception, and the ease with which truth can be drowned in rumor. The palace, once alive with power, now hums with silence. You can almost hear the faint rustle of silk, the echo of laughter that carried within it a trace of fear. The chandeliers still sparkle, but their light feels colder, as if it mourns the hands that once tended them. The affair of the diamond necklace was more than a scandal. It was a mirror held up to human nature. It showed how greed can disguise itself as faith, how love of power can masquerade as devotion, and how a lie, repeated often enough, can become a kind of truth. In the end, everyone in the story was both villain and victim, each caught in the delicate machinery of a world built on appearance. As night gathers over Versailles, the palace stands like a dream, slowly dissolving into mist. The gold fades to shadow, the laughter to silence. The story of the necklace, like so many that dwell within these walls, becomes a whisper, a reminder that even the brightest lights of history are chased by darkness, and that beauty, when mixed with deceit, shines only long enough to blind those who behold it. The air above Istanbul once carried the mingled sounds of prayer and intrigue. From the minarets of the city, the call to prayer drifted softly across the Bosphorus, echoing through the courtyards of the great Topkapi Palace. Within those walls, the empire of the Ottomans lived and breathed, a world of fragrance, color, and silence, where the line between devotion and danger was as thin as a thread of silk. To the outside world, the Sultan ruled as the shadow of God on earth. But inside the palace, beneath its domes and mosaics, power was a delicate balance, constantly shifting between hands unseen. Topkapi was not merely a palace, it was a living organism. It pulsed with secrets. Servants moved like ghosts. Eunuchs guarded doors that led to unknown chambers, and behind lattice screens, voices spoke in tones so low that even the walls struggled to hear them. The scent of rosewater and amber hung in the air, mingling with fear and desire. Here, loyalty was currency, and love could be as dangerous as betrayal. The Sultan's word could give life or take it away, but even he was never truly safe. For in Topkapi, power was both a crown and a curse. Among the many rulers who walked those marble halls, few embodied the peril of power more hauntingly than Sultan Osman II. His story is one of brilliance crushed by youth, of ambition turned to ashes within the very walls that were meant to protect him. He was young, barely 17, when he ascended the throne in 1618. The empire he inherited was vast but restless, its armies weary, its people divided. Osman dreamed not of luxury, but of reform. He saw beyond the palace, beyond the gilded gates, and longed to restore the empire's strength. But in doing so, he made the oldest mistake of all. He underestimated the dangers that lurked behind him. From the start, Osman was different. He refused to spend his reign hidden in pleasure or fear. He spoke openly of rebuilding discipline within the army, of freeing himself from the suffocating control of the Janissaries, the elite guards who had once been protectors of the throne but had grown powerful enough to rival it. His determination stirred unease. The Janissaries had long grown accustomed to their privileges, their influence within the palace unquestioned. Osman's talk of reform, his plans to replace them with new troops loyal only to him, were seen not as ambition, but as a threat. The palace began to shift around him. Servants avoided his eyes. Advisors hesitated before speaking. In the gardens, where fountains murmured and peacocks roamed freely, conversations died the moment his name was spoken. The Sultan's own harem, once a sanctuary of beauty and comfort, became a cage of uncertainty. The concubines whispered of omens. Eunuchs passed secret messages between factions. The Sultan's youth, once a symbol of promise, now became the weapon his enemies used against him. He is too young, they said. Too bold, too proud, too blind. Still, Osman pressed forward. In 1622, he made plans to journey to Mecca, a pilgrimage few Ottoman rulers had dared attempt. Officially, it was a gesture of piety. In truth, it was a strategic escape, a way to gather support outside the capital and return with loyal forces. But the Janissaries, ever watchful, learned of his plan. Their suspicion turned to rage. Rumors spread like wildfire through the barracks and the markets of Istanbul. The Sultan will destroy us, they whispered. He means to end us all. Fear, once kindled, became rebellion. The revolt began quietly, as most do. A few voices raised in dissent. A few soldiers refusing orders. But within hours, the palace was surrounded. The very guards who had sworn to protect the Sultan now stormed his home, their torches lighting the courtyards in a terrible orange glow. The sound of steel boots echoed through the marble corridors. Osman, betrayed and unprepared, fled through secret passages once meant for escape, but found every door closed to him. Allies vanished. The eunuchs, bound by fear, offered no help. By nightfall, the ruler of one of the greatest empires on earth was a prisoner in his own palace. They dragged him to the Yedikule fortress, the Seven Towers, a place whose name alone could make men tremble. There, beneath the cold stones, Osman's final moments were marked by cruelty. He pleaded for his life, for dignity, for the mercy that he had too often been told he commanded absolutely. But mercy, in the politics of the palace, was as rare as honesty. The Janissaries, determined to end his line, silenced him with brutal finality. He was only 18 years old. His body, once wrapped in silks of gold, was left broken in the shadows. The empire he sought to rebuild wept in silence, but only briefly, for the palace demanded that life and deception move on. Osman's death sent ripples through the Ottoman world. His dream of reform became legend, his fate a warning. In Topkapi, his name was whispered with reverence and regret. The harem mourned him behind veils, their tears falling into fountains that never stopped flowing. The Janissaries resumed their posts, pretending stability had returned, but the palace itself seemed to breathe differently. The corridors grew colder. The call to prayer sounded lonelier. It was as though the walls themselves remembered what they had witnessed and chose never to forget. Centuries later, the story of Sultan Osman II remains suspended between fact and myth. Some say his ghost walks the gardens of Topkapi still, a young man dressed in white, searching for the peace he was denied. Others believe the palace, with its endless courtyards and hidden doors, absorb his spirit into its very structure, keeping him alive in the way that only history can, quietly, invisibly, eternally. The marble floors that once reflected his footsteps now reflect the feet of visitors who come to marvel at the empire he once ruled, unaware that they are treading on the threshold of betrayal. To wander through Topkapi today is to move through layers of time. The air still carries the scent of rosewater and dust. The chambers of the harem, with their blue tiles and golden lattices, seem to hold a kind of mournful beauty. Each room feels heavy with stories, some told, others still waiting. The empire that once commanded half the world has faded into memory, but its palaces remain, standing in quiet defiance of time's erosion. And in the stillness of those walls, if one listens closely enough, one might hear the faint echo of Osman's final breath, a reminder that even the most powerful throne rests upon fragile ground. Power, in Topkapi, was never about strength alone. It was about endurance, about surviving long enough for history to turn fear into legend. The Sultan who dreamed too boldly was destroyed by his own protectors. Yet his death revealed the truth that all rulers eventually face, that the walls which guard also imprison, and that the crown which glitters by day casts the darkest shadow by night. Betrayal has no single birthplace. It blooms wherever power takes root, wherever love and ambition share the same breath. Across centuries, from the marble halls of Florence to the mirrored chambers of Versailles and the domed courtyards of Istanbul, the pattern repeats itself like a slow, inevitable heartbeat. The names change, the languages differ, the costumes evolve, but the essence remains constant. Those who rise must always look over their shoulder. The closer one stands to the throne, the sharper the edge of the knife becomes. It is easy to imagine betrayal as a sudden act, a dramatic moment, a dagger drawn, a cup of wine laced with poison. But in truth, it is rarely so swift. Most betrayals are slow, patient things. They begin in silence, in the pause before a promise is made, in the flicker of hesitation behind a smile. They thrive in the spaces between words, feeding on the distance that power creates between people. In palaces, where every gesture carries meaning and every glance is observed, betrayal is not an event. It is an atmosphere. It hangs in the air like incense, invisible yet inescapable. Every empire and every dynasty has been built on alliances that were never meant to last. Power demands unity, but unity demands trust, and trust is the one thing power cannot allow. The Medici learned this in Florence, as their family dinners turned into silent tests of loyalty. The French monarchy learned it in the glittering halls of Versailles, where charm replaced honesty and rumors became weapons. The Ottomans lived with it daily, their palaces designed not only to impress but to divide, to keep wives, advisors, and guards in their proper places, never close enough to conspire. The architecture of power itself became a form of protection, an attempt to build walls against the treachery of human nature. Yet no wall ever stood long enough to keep deceit outside. Betrayal, at its core, is born from fear. The fear of losing what one has, or of never having enough. In the royal courts of history, fear was as common as gold, passed quietly from one generation to the next. A prince feared his brother's ambition. A queen feared her husband's affection for another. A servant feared the ear that overheard too much. It was fear that sharpened whispers into weapons, and fear that made silence more dangerous than speech. Power does not corrupt in isolation. It corrupts through fear, through the knowledge that to stay on the throne is to stand alone. Yet betrayal is not only a symptom of power, it is also a mirror of human longing. Many of those who betrayed did so not for greed, but for survival. A servant might reveal a secret to save his life. A queen might deceive to protect her child. A soldier might choose rebellion over obedience when loyalty demanded silence in the face of injustice. In every act of treachery, there's a trace of desperation, a quiet plea to the universe to let them live one more day. History records the act, but rarely the trembling hand that performed it. The contrast between grandeur and frailty is what makes these stories endure. The palaces were built to project certainty, permanence, divine order, but within them lived people bound by the same fragile instincts as anyone else. The marble floors may have reflected power, but they also absorbed the echo of footsteps taken in fear. Each betrayal left an invisible mark, a vibration that lingered in the walls. Even centuries later, when the candles are long extinguished and the tapestries faded, the silence of these places hums faintly with remembrance. Betrayal also carries its own strange symmetry. It is cyclical, returning to those who wield it. A ruler who rises through deception will almost always fall by the same means. It is as if history insists on balance, forcing the blade to complete its circle. One can trace this rhythm across civilizations. A prince poisoned by his mother's ambition, a king overthrown by his general, an empress undone by her own conspiracies. Each act becomes the echo of the one before it, reminding us that power is not inherited. It is borrowed, briefly, and returned in pain. There's also a quieter betrayal, one that never makes its way into the records, the betrayal of self. To survive in the labyrinth of palaces, one must learn to wear masks, to smile when one wishes to scream, to bow when one wishes to run. Over time, the mask becomes the face, and the self is lost behind layers of performance. Courtiers learned this art well, perfecting the subtle nods and measured tones that concealed their exhaustion. Queens mastered it, painting serenity across faces that hid heartbreak. Kings practiced it daily, speaking of divine right while knowing their throne rested on a foundation of fear. The palace, in its perfection, demanded this sacrifice. And so, even those who never betrayed another still betrayed themselves, little by little, smile by smile. When we step back and look at history through the lens of time, it becomes clear that betrayal is not an anomaly. It is a constant companion to power, as natural as shadow to light. Without betrayal, power would grow complacent. Without power, betrayal would have no soil to grow in. They sustain one another, bound in an unending dance. The result is a paradox. The very thing that destroys kingdoms is also what gives them life. For every throne toppled, another is built upon the ruins, as if humanity cannot resist the urge to try again, knowing the pattern will repeat. There is a strange beauty in this repetition, a rhythm both tragic and inevitable. It reminds us that history does not progress in a straight line, but moves in circles, tracing the same emotions through different faces. The greed of a Renaissance duke, the envy of a courtier, the fear of a sultan. They are not ancient relics, but reflections of instincts that still live within us. We read their stories not to judge them, but to recognize them. For betrayal, though born in palaces, exists wherever human hearts seek power, love, or control. And so, as we leave behind the jeweled chambers and candlelit corridors for a moment, we carry with us the awareness that betrayal is not confined to marble walls or golden crowns. It exists in every age, in every form of ambition. The palaces of history are simply mirrors that magnify what already lies within us. When we gaze into them, what we see is not the corruption of kings, but the quiet truth of our own nature. How easily trust bends beneath desire, how quickly loyalty becomes fear. The deeper we go into the history of these palaces, the clearer it becomes. Betrayal is not the opposite of love or loyalty, but their inevitable shadow. It waits quietly, following behind every promise made, every dream of power whispered into the night. It is the unseen companion of history, moving silently beside us, reminding us that no matter how much we gild the world, human nature will always find its reflection in the dark. The night settles softly over the English countryside, where mist clings to the earth like a secret. Through the haze, the outline of a great house emerges, its towers and chimneys silhouetted against a pale, uncertain moon. The walls are old, older than memory, built in an age when kings still rode into battle and loyalty was a word measured in blood. Inside, the fire burns low, its light flickering across portraits that seem to watch from the shadows. This is the England of the Tudor court, a place where elegance and danger were bound together like vine and stone. Every whispered word could build a fortune or end a life. At the heart of this labyrinth of power was Henry VIII, a man who embodied the contradictions of his age. To some, he was a king chosen by divine right, bold, brilliant, and unstoppable. To others, he was the architect of betrayal itself, a ruler whose desires consumed not only those he loved, but the very soul of his kingdom. His court glittered with splendor, yet beneath the silks and jewels lay a restless undercurrent of fear. Servants lowered their eyes when he entered a room. Courtiers measured every word before speaking. The air in his palaces was thick with both perfume and tension, for no one knew when favor might turn to fury. Henry's palace was not unlike the others of its time, gilded, vast, and alive with secrets. But within its walls unfolded one of the most haunting stories of love and betrayal ever told, the rise and fall of Anne Boleyn. She entered the king's orbit not as a queen, but as a spark, clever, graceful, and different from the docile women who had come before her. Her eyes held ambition disguised as curiosity, and her laughter carried both charm and challenge. Henry, accustomed to obedience, found himself disarmed by her refusal to yield. She was a mystery he longed to possess, and like all mysteries that linger too long, she became his obsession. But in the glittering theater of the Tudor court, love was never simple. Every glance, every letter, every touch was shadowed by politics, and understood this better than anyone. She knew that affection could be a ladder, and that in a world ruled by men, a woman's power lived in the delicate art of persuasion. Her rise was not the story of romance. It was the story of survival. When Henry's love for her grew, it did not simply reshape his marriage. It reshaped his entire kingdom. To possess her, he tore England away from Rome, dismantled centuries of religious authority, and built a new church upon the ruins of the old. The price of that passion was written not in poetry, but in blood. At first, Anne stood triumphant. She wore her crown with quiet confidence, her eyes bright with victory. Yet victory, in the court of Henry VIII, was merely a prelude to loss. The same fire that had drawn him to her began to burn against her. Her inability to bear a son became her curse. Enemies gathered like vultures in the rafters, whispering into the king's ear, sowing doubts that took root in his restless mind. The woman who had once been his muse became his mirror, reflecting back his own fears, his own mortality. And kings, perhaps more than anyone, cannot bear to see their own weakness. The walls of the palace seemed to close in around her. The courtiers who had once bowed deeply now offered only shallow smiles. The king's gaze, once filled with warmth, grew colder, more distant. It must have felt the change long before the charges were spoken. Treason, adultery, witchcraft. The accusations came like a storm, sudden, unrelenting, and impossible to escape. Some say the evidence was fabricated, others that it was irrelevant. In the court of power, truth has never mattered as much as convenience. The trial was a performance, and Anne, who had once commanded the stage, now played the role of sacrifice. On a May morning in 1536, the executioner from France arrived at the Tower of London, a man said to be so skilled that his victims never felt the blade. The courtyard was silent except for the soft cry of gulls circling the Thames, and walked calmly to the scaffold, her composure unsettling to those who had condemned her. She wore a gown of gray damask, her hair bound beneath a simple cap. When she knelt, her final words were not of anger, but of peace. "I pray God save the king," she said softly, her voice steady in the cool morning air. The sword fell, swift and sure, and with that motion, a love that had changed the world came to its quiet, inevitable end. The palace did not mourn her for long. The tapestries remained, the music resumed, and Henry took another wife. Yet something in the air had shifted, something permanent. The court learned that no one, not even a queen, was safe from the turning tides of power. Anne's story became a warning whispered through the corridors for generations. Love in the shadow of a throne is never love at all. It is strategy, dressed in silk and crowned in sorrow. Centuries later, her spirit lingers in the imagination of England. They say that on quiet nights, when a moonlight falls on the tower's stone walls, a figure walks where the scaffold once stood, headless, yet serene, her footsteps soft as memory. Others claim she appears in the corridors of Hever Castle, her childhood home, gazing through the windows toward a life that might have been, whether ghost or legend, and remains a part of the architecture of English history, as inseparable from it as the stones themselves. Her story endures not because of its tragedy alone, but because it captures something eternal, the human desire to be both loved and powerful, and the impossibility of holding both for long. The contrast between Henry and between devotion and destruction, between crown and heart, is the contrast that defines every palace, every empire, every age. Their tale reminds us that even in the grandest halls, beneath the weight of jewels and legacy, the human soul remains fragile. As the mist thickens over the Thames, one can almost hear the echo of a soft voice carried through time, a whisper of love that turned to ruin and ruin that turned to legend. In that echo lives the essence of the palace itself, a place where dreams and nightmares are carved from the same marble, and where every story, no matter how bright it begins, eventually fades into silence. Far to the east, where the night hums differently and the stars seem closer to the earth, another palace stands, its roof curved like a prayer, its walls glimmering with moonlight reflected off the river that runs beside it. The Mughal Empire once ruled this land, a kingdom of poetry and precision, where beauty was not simply admired but built, carved, and sung into being. In its golden age, India's palaces were not mere seats of power. They were worlds of color, fragrance, and emotion. Yet beneath the magnificence of domes and marble, beneath the shimmer of gemstones and silks, there pulsed the same rhythm that haunted every throne. Love entangled with duty, devotion shadowed by loss. At the center of this story stands a man whose name history remembers in the soft tone of awe, Shah Jahan, the emperor who built the Taj Mahal. This was not the story of conquest or rebellion, but of love that refused to die, even as everything else around him did. It began in the blooming gardens of Agra, where young Prince first met the woman who would become his heart's compass, Arjamand Banu Begum, later known as Mumtaz Mahal, the chosen one of the palace. She was graceful yet unassuming, wise yet tender. In her eyes, the prince found not just affection but reflection, the calm understanding that in her presence, he could be both ruler and man. Their love was rare for an empire that measured affection through alliance. They were inseparable. She accompanied him on campaigns, advised him in matters of governance, and became the quiet force behind his calm. It was said that when he looked at her, the world itself seemed to still, as if even time bowed in acknowledgement of their union. Yet, as in every palace story, joy in its purest form invites its own undoing. Mumtaz died young, giving birth to their 14th child, her life ebbing away in the emperor's arms amid the desert winds of Burhanpur. The loss shattered him utterly. For days he neither spoke nor ate, retreating in a silence so deep that even his courtiers feared to approach. In his grief, Shah Jahan sought to create something that could defy the cruelty of time, a monument that could hold love beyond death. Thus began the construction of the Taj Mahal, the marble dream that would outlast its maker. For more than 20 years, thousands of artisans, architects, and laborers worked under his command. White marble was brought from Rajasthan, jade and crystal from China, turquoise from Tibet, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. Each stone, each curve, each carving became a verse in the emperor's silent poem to his lost queen. The Taj was not built as a monument of empire. It was built as an act of remembrance, a promise that love could transcend mortality. And yet, even in this masterpiece of devotion, betrayal found its way. For while Shah Jahan mourned and built, the empire he had inherited began to tremble beneath him. His sons, grown and ambitious, saw in his sorrow a weakness they could exploit. The emperor's devotion to memory had blinded him to the living dangers around him. Among his children was Aurangzeb, a son of sharp intellect and colder heart, whose faith and ambition would lead him to turn against his own father. The same palace that had once echoed with music and poetry now filled with the silent plotting of inheritance and fear. Aurangzeb's betrayal unfolded not in an instant, but with the patient precision of a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. Under the pretext of duty, he seized control of the empire, marching on Agra with his armies. When he finally confronted his father, the emperor who had built the Taj, he did not meet him as a son, but as a conqueror. Shah Jahan was imprisoned within his own fortress, the Red Fort of Agra, his empire taken, his freedom stripped. The man who had once ruled from the throne of peacock feathers now sat behind iron bars, his only view the distant shimmer of the Taj Mahal, glowing white under the moonlight. They say he spent his final years gazing at it, whispering her name, tracing her memory in the air with trembling hands. And so the Emperor of Love died, not in his palace, but in his prison, watching the dream he had built for another. The marble tomb that had begun as a celebration of union became the symbol of separation, the eternal contradiction of all great loves. The Taj Mahal still stands as a triumph, but it is also a wound, a soft scar across the heart of history. Each dawn that touches its surface glows not only with beauty, but with grief. In Shah Jahan's story lies the delicate balance between love and power, devotion and delusion. His palace was filled with music, art, and the scent of roses, yet beneath it all ran the quiet current of inevitability, that the same empire which allowed him to build the greatest monument to love would also conspire to destroy him. The Taj Mahal's white marble, pure and perfect, conceals the darkness of betrayal that birthed it, the son who imprisoned his father, the empire that traded emotion for order. And still, the monument remains a silent contradiction, both beauty and sorrow, both triumph and tragedy. To walk through the Taj at night, when a moonlight spills over its smooth domes, is to step into that contradiction. The air feels strangely alive, as if the stones themselves breathe. The garden fountains murmur softly, their rhythm like a heartbeat slowed by time. In the reflection pools, the image of the monument wavers gently, as though the past still trembles beneath the surface. The world outside fades. What remains is a stillness that hums with longing. You can almost hear the faint echo of voices, hers soft and gentle, his weary but devoted. They linger there, not as ghosts, but as memory itself. Every empire has its masterpiece, and every masterpiece hides a cost. The Taj Mahal's perfection is inseparable from the pain that inspired it. It stands as proof that even the greatest rulers, with all their wealth and armies, cannot command the heart. They can only surrender to it and suffer what follows. Shah Jahan's devotion immortalized him, but it also destroyed him. In the end, he became what he tried to resist, a prisoner of love and fate. The Taj endures, shimmering against the dawn, carrying within its marble veins the contradictions of the human soul. For those who visit it centuries later, it is not only a monument to love, it is a reminder that beauty itself can be born from ruin, that devotion can outlast betrayal, and that even when the empire crumbles, the echo of a single heartbeat can resonate through eternity. The sea has a way of softening sound, of turning even the cruelest stories into whispers. Off the coast of Denmark, the waves lap gently against the stone walls of Kronborg Castle, an immense fortress of gray and gold that seems to hover between the worlds of myth and memory. The air smells faintly of salt and iron, the wind weaving through corridors that once carried the scent of candle smoke and ink. To most who visit, Kronborg is a monument of history, immortalized by Shakespeare as Elsinore, the setting of Hamlet. But long before the playwright gave it a voice, the castle had its own. The quiet murmur of kings and courtiers, of secrets sealed behind tapestries, and of betrayals that were both real and imagined. Kronborg was born from ambition, built in the 16th century by King Frederick II as both a fortress and a symbol. It stood at the edge of the narrow Øresund Strait, a gatekeeper of passage between the Baltic and the North Sea. Every ship that crossed was forced to pay a toll, and the wealth that flowed into Denmark turned the castle into a jewel of the north. But like all symbols of power, it soon became something more, a mirror for the insecurities of those who ruled within. Behind its austere beauty, the air thickened with suspicion and sorrow. Frederick's reign passed, and his son, Christian IV, inherited both the castle and its burdens. Christian was a man of contradictions, visionary yet reckless, a builder of cities and destroyer of fortunes. He sought to make Denmark a power to rival its neighbors, but his hunger for glory brought endless wars and mounting losses. Kronborg, once a beacon of control, became his retreat, a place where he could drown his failures in the echo of the sea. The tapestries of his victories still hung on the walls, but each passing year made them feel more like lies. And it was in that quiet decay that the myth of Hamlet found its home. Though the prince himself never lived, his story captured something deeply true about the place. Elsinore was not invented, it was remembered. The tale of a young man tormented by doubt, haunted by betrayal, and trapped within walls that could not contain his grief, reflected the mood of the castle itself. The courtiers who once laughed in the great hall now walked its corridors as though burdened by invisible weights. The guards who stood watch at night swore they heard footsteps in the empty chambers, the faint rustle of robes where no living soul passed. The legend of the ghost, the spirit of a murdered king wandering through Kronborg's cold corridors, was not born from fiction alone. There had been real deaths, real whispers of poison and deceit. Court politics in the North were no gentler than those of the South. Ambition was no less sharp for being hidden beneath fur-lined coats. Within these walls, loyalties shifted like the tide. Brothers plotted against brothers, advisors spun webs of deceit, and kings learned that solitude was the only true armor. The North, with all its cold restraint, knew betrayal as intimately as any sunlit court of Europe. The sea, too, seemed to sense it. On stormy nights, the waves would rise like walls of glass, striking against the ramparts with a roar that shook the foundation. The centuries spoke of shapes in the mist, figures walking along the battlements, their cloaks billowing in the wind, their faces indistinct. Some said they were the spirits of sailors lost to the tolling ships. Others claimed they were the restless ghosts of kings who had trusted the wrong hearts. And still others believed that the castle itself was alive, that it absorbed the grief of its inhabitants and released it only when the wind blew from the east. Centuries passed, and the wars that once defined Kronborg faded into history. The cannons rusted, the drawbridges creaked, and the rooms filled with dust instead of power. Yet the feeling of unease remained. Even now, visitors who walk its echoing halls at twilight describe an almost sentient stillness, the sense that the air remembers. The great ballroom, where nobles once danced beneath candlelit chandeliers, feels too vast, too quiet, as if waiting for music that will never play again. The royal apartments, preserved in their solemn beauty, still smell faintly of salt and time. Perhaps what lingers most is the sense of reflection. Kronborg stands not only as a relic of the past, but as a kind of mirror, both literal and spiritual. Its windows face the sea, and when one looks through them at dusk, The light of the water reflects back, pale, cold, and infinite. It becomes impossible to tell where the castle ends and the horizon begins. This illusion of merging, of blending the real with the unreal, is what has always drawn storytellers to its gates. In this place, fact and fiction breathe the same air, history and imagination walking side by side. And in that blending lies the heart of the story. The understanding that the ghosts of Kronborg are not merely spirits of the dead, but echoes of human emotion itself. Doubt, fear, guilt, longing, these are the true hauntings. The figure of Hamlet, forever torn between action and hesitation, reflects the soul of every ruler who has ever walked those halls, burdened by the knowledge that every decision comes with its shadow. His father's ghost, whether real or imagined, is the embodiment of memory that refuses to fade. In Kronborg, that memory is everywhere, in the creak of the stairs, in the chill of the stone, in the sigh of the wind through broken glass. When the moon rises over the sea, silvering the battlements, the castle feels both eternal and fleeting. One can almost believe that the spirits of the past still stand guard at its gates, their armor rusted, their hearts still beating faintly within the cold metal of history. The sea below reflects them, carrying their images out into the dark waters, where they dissolve into mist. The sound of the waves becomes indistinguishable from the sound of distant voices, a lullaby of loss and remembrance. Kronborg's beauty lies not in its perfection, but in its melancholy. It reminds us that even the grandest fortresses cannot defend against time, and that the most loyal hearts can falter when tested by fear. The tragedies that unfolded there, both real and imagined, were not failures of strength, but of trust. And trust, once broken, is a wound that no empire can fully heal. As the night deepens, the sea draws closer, whispering against the stones as though reciting an ancient confession. The stars shimmer faintly above, scattered like forgotten crowns across the sky. Somewhere within the walls, a door closes softly, and the echo lingers, a sound that could be footsteps or memory or the slow, enduring heartbeat of the past. In the stillness of that sound, Kronborg becomes more than a castle. It becomes a testament to the fragile balance between faith and doubt, between truth and illusion. It is a place where the living and the dead coexist, where stories refuse to end, and where every silence feels like a question that will never be answered. And in that silence, one can almost understand why the sea, restless and eternal, keeps returning to its walls, to listen, to remember, to grieve. The echoes of the past are carried by the winds that sweep across the lands of ancient Persia, where the palaces of the kings stood like luminous symbols of power and decadence. Here, amidst the deserts and mountain ranges, the palaces of the Safavid dynasty once rose like mirages, gleaming marble structures filled with intricate tilework, soaring domes, and vast courtyards that could contain the whole of an empire's splendor. Yet beneath these towering walls, beneath the golden friezes and the delicate carvings, there simmered a tale of betrayal that would ultimately unravel the very fabric of the empire. At the heart of this story is one of the most enigmatic figures in Persian history, Shah Abbas I. His reign was marked by dramatic achievements: the strengthening of Persia's political power, the expansion of trade routes, the flourishing of art and culture, and the establishment of Isfahan as one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Shah Abbas's vision was one of greatness, a dream of unifying his vast empire, which stretched from the mountains of the Caucasus to the deserts of Persia and beyond. He knew that in order to secure his rule and maintain his empire's dominance, he would have to wield his power with both wisdom and ruthless precision. Yet Shah Abbas's journey to power was not without its bloodstains. His father, Shah Muhammad Qutbanda, was a weak ruler, and the Safavid dynasty was threatened by internal strife and the constant tug-of-war between the ruling factions. Young Abbas, known for his fierce ambition and cunning, saw an opportunity to seize control, and with the support of the military, he overthrew his father in a brutal coup. To cement his authority, He carried out a series of purges within his own family, eliminating potential rivals to the throne, including his half-brothers and cousins. The halls of the royal palaces, once filled with laughter and warmth, were now stained with the blood of those who had once shared his blood. But it was not just the royal family that suffered under Shah Abbas's iron-fisted rule. The court itself became a place where intrigue and betrayal were a constant undercurrent, and the walls of the palaces were alive with whispered conspiracies. Shah Abbas's mistrust of those closest to him became well known. Even his trusted advisors were not exempt from suspicion. His Grand Vizier, who had served him loyally for years, was executed on charges of corruption, though some say it was simply another act of Abbas's paranoia, a way to remove any potential threat to his throne. The heart of the intrigue lay in the royal harem, the very place that should have been a sanctuary, where the king's concubines and wives were confined within the walls of the palace. To outsiders, it seemed like a world of luxury and endless beauty. The women were adorned in silks, their skin glowing beneath golden jewelry, and the air was rich with the scent of exotic flowers. But within these chambers, alliances were forged and broken, and betrayal was often as close as the flutter of a silk curtain. Shah Abbas's favorite wife, the beautiful and intelligent Mahdi Alia, was both a source of his affection and the target of his suspicions. She had borne him several sons, but it was clear to everyone that her power was growing. She had the ear of the king, and her influence at court was undeniable. As a result, she became a pawn in the palace's dangerous game of power. There are accounts that suggest that her rivals, jealous of her status, plotted against her, even going so far as to accuse her of witchcraft and conspiracy. In the end, Abbas's own paranoia led him to take drastic action. His beloved wife was imprisoned, and her supporters were executed, her once powerful position at court reduced to nothing more than a footnote in the larger story of the empire's unraveling. This was a pattern that continued throughout Abbas's rule. The palaces, filled with luxuries beyond compare, became the stage for a never-ending cycle of intrigue and deception. Even the very design of his royal palaces seemed to reflect this underlying tension. The grand spaces, designed to impress visitors and demonstrate the king's power, often had hidden chambers and secret passageways, designed for espionage and escape. The grand halls, where courtiers once mingled and exchanged poetry, became places where whispers of treason and betrayal filled the air. The gardens, so meticulously designed, concealed hidden paths that led to the darkest corners of the palace, where plots were hatched and lives were destroyed. As Shah Abbas grew older, his paranoia deepened. His once brilliant mind, which had orchestrated the rise of the Safavid Empire, began to cloud with suspicion. His physical health began to fail, and he became increasingly isolated within his palaces. The same courtiers who had once been his closest confidants became his enemies, and the very palace that had been a symbol of power began to feel like a prison. His once legendary military campaigns became fewer and fewer, as the emperor retreated further into his palatial walls, surrounded by the guards who kept watch over him but never saw the danger from within. The final act of this dark tale took place in the quiet chambers of the palace at Isfahan, where Shah Abbas passed from life to death. It is said that on his deathbed, the once mighty ruler of Persia was surrounded not by loyal supporters, but by whispers of treason and betrayal. His sons, who had once been the light of his life, now vied for power, eager to claim the throne for themselves. His death, though not unexpected, marked the end of an era and the beginning of the Safavid Empire's slow and inevitable decline. The empire he had fought so hard to build crumbled under the weight of the betrayals and intrigues that had stained it from within. Today, the palaces of the Safavid dynasty stand as ruins, their marble columns cracked and crumbling, the tilework faded with age. Visitors wander through the courtyards and gardens, unaware of the dark history that lies buried beneath the beauty. The story of Shah Abbas and his empire is a tale of grandeur and glory, but also of deception, paranoia, and the deadly consequences of unchecked power. His palaces, once symbols of Persian opulence, now serve as a quiet reminder that no matter how high one's throne may rise, the fall can be just as swift and devastating. As the sun sets over the ruins of Isfahan, casting long shadows across the ancient stones, one can almost hear the faint echoes of the past, a whisper of betrayal, a murmur of power, and a soft rustling of silk and secrets. The palaces may be silent now, but they hold within them the stories of those who once walked their halls, men and women whose lives were shaped and destroyed by the very same power that built those walls. In the end, Shah Abbas's empire was not brought low by outside invaders or the weight of its own ambition, but by the shadows that moved within its own palaces, where trust was as fragile as the delicate tiles that still adorn its walls. The ancient land of Egypt, draped in the timeless grandeur of its pyramids and the cool shade of its iconic temples, carries with it a deep, silent sorrow that seems woven into the very fabric of its history. Among its many wonders, the tombs and palaces of the pharaohs stand as both monuments to power and to the frailty of human ambition. The story of the royal family of Egypt is one of dizzying ascent and tragic downfall, woven with divine mandates, ruthless intrigue, and betrayal so deep that it would forever alter the course of one of the world's oldest and most powerful civilizations. At the heart of this tangled web of history is the story of the famous and fabled Queen Cleopatra VII, a ruler whose life, love affairs, and demise became the stuff of legend. Cleopatra's reign unfolded against the backdrop of an Egypt in turmoil. Though the land had once been a beacon of culture, wealth, and power, by the time she took the throne, Egypt was a fragmented kingdom caught between the rising tide of Roman imperialism and the internal struggles for control. She inherited the throne at a young age, thrust into a world of political rivalry and bloodshed. Cleopatra's family, the Ptolemies, were descendants of one of Alexander the Great's generals, and their rule over Egypt was marked by their Greek heritage, a foreign dynasty in the land of the pharaohs. Though they ruled Egypt, they were not Egyptians by blood, and their reign was constantly threatened by rebellions, internal dissent, and the growing power of Rome. The early years of Cleopatra's reign were marked by a struggle to secure her position. The intrigue and betrayal that unfolded in the palace were as dangerous as the political climate outside its walls. Her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, was her co-ruler, but their sibling relationship quickly turned from alliance to hostility. The court of Alexandria, once a vibrant center of learning, became a cauldron of ambition and jealousy. Cleopatra, a brilliant and cunning leader, understood that to preserve her power and the stability of Egypt, she had to secure alliances with the most powerful forces in the world, and at that time, that meant aligning herself with Rome. It was in the midst of this turbulence that Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome, entered Cleopatra's life. The encounter between the two is shrouded in myth and mystery. What began as a political alliance soon blossomed into something far more intimate and world-shaping. Cleopatra famously traveled to Rome in disguise, smuggling herself into the Roman court in a roll of carpet, or so the story goes. Her presence stirred the Roman elite, and her beauty, intelligence, and charm soon captured Caesar's heart. They became lovers, and their affair produced a son, Caesar Ion, whom Cleopatra proclaimed as the true heir of Julius Caesar, a move that would forever alter the trajectory of both the Egyptian and Roman empires. The alliance between Cleopatra and Caesar brought Egypt back into the fold of Roman power, though it came at a great personal cost. The death of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE was a devastating blow to Cleopatra, not only because she had lost her lover, but also because the very foundation of her power was shattered. The political balance she had so carefully crafted crumbled, and she was once again left vulnerable, with enemies both within Egypt and outside it. Cleopatra's determination to preserve Egypt's sovereignty and her throne led her into yet another dangerous alliance, this time with the Roman general Mark Antony, who was also struggling to secure his position in Rome. The relationship between Cleopatra and Antony, much like her affair with Caesar, became an emblem of political necessity laced with personal passion. Their union was both a love story and a political alliance, one that would soon ignite the flames of Roman civil war. Cleopatra and Antony ruled together as monarchs in the east, with Cleopatra in Alexandria and Antony overseeing Roman interests in the eastern provinces. They had 3 children together, and Cleopatra's power seemed, for a time, as formidable as ever. But as Antony's rival Octavian, soon to be Augustus, the first Roman emperor, gained power in Rome, the dynamics between the 3 leaders grew increasingly strained. The tensions between Octavian and Antony soon reached a boiling point, with the 2 men on opposite sides of a growing conflict for control of Rome. The stage was set for the final tragedy that would consume both Cleopatra's life and Egypt's place in history. The naval battle of Actium in 31 BCE marked the culmination of this struggle, with Octavian's forces decisively defeating Antony and Cleopatra's fleet. Their fate was sealed. Cleopatra and Antony, in defeat, fled back to Egypt. The city of Alexandria, once a thriving center of culture and commerce, became a place of mourning and despair. The specter of betrayal loomed large as both Antony and Cleopatra faced the realization that their world, their empire, and their love had come to an irreversible end. As Octavian's armies marched towards Alexandria, Cleopatra and Antony knew that their days were numbered. Their last moments together were fraught with despair, as each of them understood that their defeat would mean not just the loss of power, but also death. In the final, tragic scene of their lives, both Cleopatra and Antony chose to end their own lives rather than be paraded through Rome as prisoners. The exact details of their deaths are still a matter of historical debate. Some say Cleopatra had herself bitten by an asp, while others suggest that both she and Antony drank poison in a final act of defiance. Whatever the truth, their deaths were a tragic end to a story filled with passion, politics, and betrayal. With the deaths of Cleopatra and Antony, Egypt's ancient monarchy was no more. The once great kingdom fell into the hands of the Roman Empire, its fate sealed by the ambitions of 2 foreign powers and the passions of 2 ill-fated lovers. Egypt's sovereignty was lost, and Cleopatra's dream of an independent Egypt was shattered. The palaces of Alexandria, once filled with the sounds of music, art, and intellectual discourse, now stood silent. The legacy of the great queen, whose beauty and intellect had once captivated the world, became overshadowed by the forces of imperialism and the harsh realities of power. Today, Cleopatra's story continues to captivate the imagination of people around the world. Her life, her reign, and her tragic end serve as a powerful reminder of the cost of ambition, love, and betrayal. In the ruins of the ancient city of Alexandria, where Cleopatra once ruled, the echoes of her court still linger, as if the walls of the palace still remember the queen who walked within them. Her name is whispered in the winds that sweep through the ruins, and her legend lives on, intertwined with the timeless dance of power, love, and loss. Cleopatra's palaces, though long gone, remain symbolic of the complex relationship between power and betrayal. They stand not only as symbols of the ancient world, but as poignant reminders that even the greatest rulers are not immune to the forces of fate, ambition, and the human heart. Cleopatra's reign, her alliances, and her ultimate betrayal by both her enemies and her allies offer a haunting meditation on the fragility of power and the tragic consequences of love intertwined with politics. The palaces of ancient Egypt, where once the might of pharaohs held sway, now lie in ruins, but their story, shaped by the rise and fall of empires, the warmth of passion, and the coldness of betrayal, endures. In the heart of the Byzantine Empire, a world that bridged the ancient traditions of Rome with the emerging Christian order, the palaces of Constantinople rose with an almost supernatural grandeur. These were not mere buildings, but living symbols of imperial power, housing emperors whose very existence seemed to transcend the mortal realm. Yet, beneath the gilded domes, the marble pillars, and the serene beauty of mosaics depicting divine scenes, there were dark, hidden tales of ambition, treachery, and power struggles. The Byzantine court was a place where the line between faith and politics was often blurred, and where betrayals were not only common, they were expected. One such story that stands at the forefront of Byzantine intrigue is that of the Empress Theodora, wife to Emperor Justinian I, and a woman whose life and reign offer a captivating narrative of survival, power, and the ultimate betrayal of loyalty. Theodora's rise to power was nothing short of remarkable. Born into poverty and obscurity, she had once been an actress, a profession that, in the eyes of many, rendered her unsuitable for the exalted role of empress. Her early life was filled with scandal and hardship, as she was linked with the theater's often tawdry reputation, where she performed in plays that mocked the ruling elite. But Theodora was no ordinary woman, and her ambition extended far beyond the confines of the stage. It was her meeting with Justinian, then a young and ambitious heir to the throne, that changed the course of her life. Despite her humble origins, she won his heart and, remarkably, became his partner in both marriage and rule. Their union was a political and emotional alliance that was unprecedented for its time. Justinian was known for his vision of restoring the Roman Empire to its former glory, and Theodora was his fiercest ally in that endeavor. Together, they would change the course of history and shape the future of the Byzantine Empire in ways that would echo through the centuries. Yet Theodora's rise to power did not come without its sacrifices. In her position as empress, she faced constant challenges from rivals within the imperial court, as well as from those who viewed her humble beginnings as a threat to the ancient order. The palace walls were filled with whispers of her past, her former life in the theater, and her questionable connections. Some courtiers even questioned her worthiness to sit beside the emperor, casting a shadow over her every decision. Despite these challenges, Theodora proved herself to be a shrewd and capable ruler, not just a consort to her husband. Her greatest moment of power, and perhaps her most significant betrayal, came during the Nika riots of 532 AD, one of the most violent uprisings in the history of Constantinople. The city was in chaos, with angry mobs flooding the streets, demanding the overthrow of Justinian. The crowds, which were largely made up of chariot racing factions, had gathered in opposition to Justinian's tax reforms and his increasing autocracy. As the riots grew more violent, the emperor was faced with the prospect of losing his throne, and the situation seemed dire. Many of Justinian's advisors urged him to flee, to abandon the city, and save his life. But it was Theodora who stood firm, who refused to run from the mob, and who, with a cold and calculating resolve, convinced her husband to stay and fight for the empire. In a speech that would be immortalized in history, Theodora is said to have declared, "The royal purple is the noblest shroud," signifying that she would rather die than abandon her position of power. This moment of defiance was a testament to her strength and vision, but it was also a demonstration of the dark nature of power. Theodora's influence over Justinian was immense, and her determination led to the eventual suppression of the riots, but not without a price. The bloody crackdown that followed saw thousands of rioters killed, and Theodora's role in this ruthless decision was one that would haunt the empire's conscience. While it preserved Justinian's rule, it also laid the foundation for future mistrust in the imperial court, where power was often achieved not through benevolence, but through the coldness of ruthless decision-making. As the empire recovered from the violence of the Nika riots, Theodora's position as empress became stronger than ever, but so did the intrigues within the court. The palace, with its glittering beauty, became a center of deceit, betrayal, and political maneuvering. Ambitious courtiers, some of whom had once served under her as loyal aides, began to plot against her. Rival factions within the court sought to weaken her influence over Justinian and to reassert their own power. Theodora, once a symbol of strength and unwavering loyalty, began to see her support within the palace crumble. Her most trusted ally, a high-ranking court official, was accused of treason and executed. The very people she had once trusted, the ones who had helped her rise to power, were now her betrayers. Theodora, who had been instrumental in Justinian's consolidation of power, now found herself in the dangerous position of being surrounded by enemies who would stop at nothing to bring her down. The walls of the palace, once filled with the sounds of music and laughter, became silent, each whisper carrying the weight of secrets, lies, and plotting. Despite her ultimate betrayal by those within the court, Theodora's reign would leave an indelible mark on history. She remains one of the most fascinating and complex figures of the Byzantine Empire. Her rise from humble beginnings to empress, her political acumen, and her unyielding loyalty to her husband and the empire she helped build all stand in stark contrast to the dark, brutal betrayal she endured within the very walls of the palace. The palace itself, now a memory, still holds the imprints of her power, her pain, and the intricate web of politics that shaped her reign. The legacy of Theodora and Justinian remains one of both triumph and tragedy, a reminder of how power, once so carefully constructed, can be so easily shattered by those who conspire from within. The palaces of Constantinople, where the couple once lived and ruled, are now ruins, but the story of their reign and the betrayals that marked it continues to resonate. In the halls where once the laughter of courtiers and the whispers of imperial decisions filled the air, only silence remains. Yet that silence speaks volumes, carrying with it the knowledge that power, no matter how absolute, is always vulnerable to the forces of betrayal and ambition. And in the case of Theodora, the betrayal came not only from her enemies outside, but from those who had once sworn loyalty to her within the very walls she had helped to build. In the end, Theodora's life was a testament to the complexities of political power and the dark shadows that accompany it. Her palace was both her throne and her tomb, a place where loyalty could be bought, but at a high price. Theodora's legacy is that of a woman who understood the game of power all too well, and who played it with ruthless intelligence, even as those closest to her conspired to betray her. The palaces of Byzantium, where once her name was whispered in awe, now stand as empty shells of a time long gone. But her story, entwined with ambition, loyalty, and betrayal, endures. Across the mist-shrouded highlands of Scotland, where the wind moves like a living spirit and the moors seem to breathe with their own memories, there stands the haunting beauty of Edinburgh Castle. Perched high upon Castle Rock, it dominates the skyline like a crown of stone, its silhouette etched against the shifting gray of the northern sky. The fortress has watched over centuries of history, wars, coronations, betrayals, and ghost stories whispered through time. It is a place where loyalty and treachery have shared the same chambers, where the line between devotion and deceit was often as thin as the morning fog that curls around its walls. Within its ancient stones lies the story of Mary, Queen of Scots, a tale of grace and tragedy, of royal ambition and the slow unraveling of trust. Mary's story begins with hope. Born into the Stuart line, she became queen before her first birthday, inheriting the crown of Scotland after her father's death. Sent away to France for her safety, she was raised among splendor, tutored in politics and poetry, destined for greatness. As a young woman, she possessed a charm that disarmed those around her, a blend of elegance, wit, and an almost otherworldly beauty. When she returned to Scotland to rule, she carried with her the ideals of French courtly life, refinement, diplomacy, and faith. But Scotland was not France. It was a land torn between the old Catholic faith and the rising tide of Protestantism, between noble clans who wielded power like swords and a people suspicious of foreign influence. From the moment Mary stepped foot on Scottish soil, she was both adored and resented, a queen in name, yet a stranger in her own kingdom. The royal court at Holyrood Palace became a theater of both splendor and tension. Mary's charm and intelligence earned her admirers, but her decisions quickly sowed seeds of discord. Her marriage to Lord Darnley, a handsome but vain nobleman with royal blood, was meant to strengthen her claim to the English throne and unite factions within Scotland. Instead, it unleashed a spiral of jealousy and betrayal. Darnley's arrogance and instability made him a liability, his temper as unpredictable as the Scottish weather. Their union, once heralded as a symbol of royal unity, turned bitter, The corridors of Holyrood filled with the sound of arguments and muffled weeping, and even the servants whispered that the queen no longer smiled as she once did. The tragedy deepened with the arrival of David Rizzio, Mary's Italian secretary and confidant. Rizzio was cultured, musically gifted, and fiercely loyal to the queen, but his influence over her angered the Scottish nobles, and none more than Darnley. Fueled by jealousy and political manipulation, Darnley and his conspirators plotted Rizzio's murder. One night, as Mary dined with a few close attendants, the doors burst open. Darnley led a group of armed men into her private chamber. Before the queen's horrified eyes, Rizzio was dragged from her side and stabbed repeatedly, his blood staining the floor of the palace. Mary, heavily pregnant at the time, could only watch in silent terror as her trusted friend was slaughtered before her. The act left her shaken, her faith in those around her broken beyond repair. After Rizzio's murder, the bond between Mary and Darnley disintegrated entirely. The palace became colder, emptier, its candlelit halls filled with suspicion. Whispers grew that the queen's enemies were growing stronger, that even her own husband might be her greatest threat. And then came another betrayal, one that would seal both their fates. In February of 1567, Darnley was found dead after an explosion destroyed the house where he was staying. His body, however, bore no signs of burns. Instead, he had been strangled. The mysterious circumstances of his death sent shockwaves across Europe. Many accused Mary of complicity, claiming she had plotted his death with James Hepburn, the Earl of Bothwell, a man both admired and feared for his charisma and ruthlessness. Whether out of love, desperation, or manipulation, Mary soon married Bothwell, an act that would forever stain her reputation. The union with Bothwell proved to be the final straw for her subjects. Scotland's nobles rose against her, declaring that the queen had betrayed her people and her crown. Mary's forces were defeated, and she was imprisoned within the cold, echoing walls of Lochleven Castle. There, stripped of her power, she was forced to abdicate in favor of her infant son, James VI. Alone in her chamber, with only the sound of water lapping against the island's edge, she wrote letters, pleas for mercy, for understanding, for redemption. But mercy never came. Mary managed to escape from Lochleven, her courage and determination undiminished. She fled south to England, seeking refuge with her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I. Yet in a cruel twist of fate, the very woman she sought protection from became her captor. Elizabeth, ever wary of threats to her throne, saw in Mary both a rival and a symbol, a Catholic queen whose claim to England's crown was stronger in the eyes of many. What began as house arrest soon turned into long years of confinement. Mary was moved from castle to castle, Tutbury, Sheffield, Fotheringhay, each one becoming less a home and more a prison. In those years of captivity, Mary's spirit remained unbroken, though her heart grew heavy with isolation. She wrote poetry, prayers, and letters, her words filled with longing and sorrow. Yet even in her solitude, the web of intrigue around her never ceased. Elizabeth's advisors suspected her of plotting with Catholic conspirators to overthrow the English queen. Whether true or fabricated, the accusations sealed her fate. After nearly 19 years of captivity, Mary was tried for treason, a queen condemned by another queen. Her execution in 1587 was both solemn and symbolic. As she was led to the scaffold in Fotheringhay Castle, Mary wore a gown of dark velvet, beneath which she revealed a crimson petticoat, the color of martyrdom. Her composure never wavered as she knelt before the axe, her final words a prayer for forgiveness and peace. When the blade fell, it was said that even those who had condemned her wept. The story of Mary, Queen of Scots, is one of the most haunting tales in history, a saga of love, power, and betrayal that unfolded within the stone walls of Scotland's grandest palaces. The echoes of her life linger in those places still. At Holyrood Palace, the spot where Rizzio was murdered is said to remain stained, no matter how many times it has been scrubbed clean. At Edinburgh Castle, her spirit is said to wander, still seeking justice that was denied her. And in the chill air of the highlands, where the mist curls around the ruins of old strongholds, her name is whispered like a prayer carried by the wind. Her story, like the land itself, is steeped in contrast, beauty and brutality, loyalty and betrayal, hope and despair. The castles that once held her now stand as sentinels of memory, their stones cold, but their silence filled with meaning. They remind us that the crown, for all its glitter and promise, is often the heaviest burden of all, and that power, when entwined with love and deceit, can become a curse rather than a gift. As night falls over Edinburgh and the lights of the city flicker below the ancient fortress, one might imagine her gaze from the ramparts, fixed upon a horizon that she would never reach. The wind moves through the empty corridors of her past, carrying with it a faint echo of her voice, melancholic, regal, and unyielding. It is the sound of a queen whose story refused to die, whose life remains a mirror reflecting the timeless dance between glory and ruin, between the loyalty of the heart and the cold inevitability of betrayal. In the heart of Beijing lies the Forbidden City, once the sacred center of the world and home to emperors who ruled as sons of heaven. Behind its crimson walls and golden roofs, life unfolded in silence and ceremony. Yet beneath that calm lay centuries of ambition and betrayal. Eunuchs, concubines, and courtiers moved like shadows, each guarding secrets that could mean power or death. During the Ming Dynasty, Emperor Wanli's withdrawal from court created a void that swallowed the empire. Into that silence rose Wei Zhongxian, a eunuch whose cunning made him master of all within the palace. Ministers vanished, scholars were silenced, and fear replaced faith until his downfall turned his name into a warning whispered through time. Under the Qing, new rulers claimed heaven's mandate, but deceit endured. None embodied its paradox more fully than Empress Dowager Cixi. Once a concubine, she became the unseen ruler of an empire. Brilliant and ruthless, she preserved China's throne even as it crumbled beneath her. In her final years, the Forbidden City mirrored her soul, magnificent yet filled with ghosts. When the last emperor fell, the palace grew still. Its courtyards, once alive with ceremony, turned to dust and memory. Visitors today say the air itself seems to remember, the rustle of silk, the echo of a closing gate. The Forbidden City endures not just as stone and paint, but as a living echo of all who loved, lied, and lost within its walls, a place where power burned bright and left behind only silence. Now the night settles, and the stories of these palaces drift into quiet. From the storm-lit towers of Europe to the walled courts of Asia, each has told the same truth. Power dazzles, then devours. The rulers who once commanded nations now live only in whispers, their grandeur softened by time. Betrayal was always part of their story, woven through love, faith, and fear. Every crown carried its shadow, yet within their fall lies something achingly human, the reminder that ambition and fragility share the same heart. The palaces, long abandoned, still breathe softly in the dark, holding the warmth of all who once dreamed within their walls. Now they stand as mirrors of memory. When the moonlight spills across their empty halls, it is easy to imagine the echo of silk and the murmur of forgotten prayers. History does not die. It only grows still, waiting to be heard again. And so, as the last candle flickers out, we understand that these tales are not just of rulers and wars, but of us. We, too, build fragile empires of love and longing and watch them fade with time. Yet in that fading, beauty remains, the quiet comfort of remembrance. The night deepens, the palaces sleep, and in their stillness, the past exhales, a soft breath carried into the stars, reminding us that even the grandest stories end not in noise, but in peace.